All right, it looks like I'm live through Zoom. Zoom must be on a delay when I'm looking at myself. Okay. I'm gonna let people know. All right, yeah, okay, there's a delay with YouTube. Okay, so I'm just getting set up here. We're gonna talk about the science behind why the vaccine mandates will increase transmission. And I'm just letting people on other social media know that I'm live on YouTube. So I was trying to use Restream to go through right, I'm letting Facebook know. Let's see, gonna let some people on Telegram know. And we're gonna let Instagram folks get in on this. And all right, so I think everyone knows now, we're going to be talking about the science behind why vaccine mandates will increase the transmission rate. I'm live streaming from Zoom. I've never done this before. So I think, so folks who are on Instagram, I will try to show you with my phone the graphs when it's important to look at something. And but if you go to the YouTube channel, that will be the best way to get screen share. So you'll have a better view of this on the YouTube channel. So I just want to make sure I can see the live chat on YouTube. Okay, so I paused. Well, I think I can turn my computer audio all the way down. And hopefully now I'll be able to see the live chat on YouTube. Okay. John Osborne says, thank you for what you do. You're welcome. Margarita says, hey, thanks for the informative discussion. Keep it up. You're welcome. Craig Health says, hey, Chris, hey. James says, have you made a Gab account in case you get banned? I'm working on figuring, I mean, so far I've just made Telegram in case I get banned. And I'm working on researching what the best ways to deal with deplatforming are, including extra accounts and other social media. I was looking at Odyssey, but I think they have some real severe corporate direction and marketing issues. But that made me very interested in the general concept of using BitTorrent technology to back up my videos rather than relying on social media or whatever. But anyway, so we're going to jump right into the science. I want this to be real succinct. So by the end of this week, I should have a fully referenced article clearly laying out the case of whether vaccines increase or decrease the rate of transmission. And a few hours ago my research was a couple days ago, because I'm just getting back into the research now, and I'll be spending the rest of the day on it. But I was almost leaning in the direction of concluding that the vaccines themselves might modestly reduce the transmission rate, on the basis that the Johnson & Johnson and Moderna trials both found a decrease in the infection rate, period. Pfizer didn't even look at that. So all the vaccine trials were not primarily looking at the rate of infection. They were looking at symptomatic cases. And in those cases, you had to have symptoms and be a suspected COVID case before you got tested. And so there was nothing about asymptomatic transmission. However, in the Pfizer trial, there was never anything about asymptomatic infection. So like PCR positivity, for example, would be considered evidence that you were infected. And if you had no symptoms, that would be asymptomatic infection. So Pfizer never looked at that. Moderna, although they didn't intend to look at that at the beginning, and they didn't have any data on that in their interim results that were published a few months ago, just in September, a few weeks ago, they came out with their 6-month results that go up to the end of the blinded phase of the trial. So after they, up to the point where they asked everyone, hey, do you want to know what group you're in? And then if they did, they were in the placebo group, they said, hey, do you want the vaccine? And so somehow somehow our biggest problem is vaccine hesitancy, yet in the placebo group of the Moderna trial, 98% of the people were like, yeah, I want the vaccine. So anyway, probably some selection bias going on there. But in any case, when the participants came to make that decision, just, do you want to be unblinded and do you want the vaccine if you're in the placebo group? When they went there, they PCR tested them. And so they found, and they also tested their serum for antibodies to nucleocapsid, which is the protein on the outside of the virus, in the coating of the virus, that is very specific for natural infection. So the vaccines are meant to give you antibodies against the spike protein specifically. And so, like, if you go to get LabCorp, for example, to get a test, then you have a few options, and those include just spike protein antibodies, which could mean you were infected or you were vaccinated, but they also include nucleocapsid antibodies, which and those, you're not going to get nucleocapsid antibodies from a vaccine. You're going to get them from a natural infection. So in the Moderna results, they, at the end of the trial, when they asked when they unblinded and vaccinated the placebo group, they said, okay, we're going to PCR test everyone. We're going to nucleocapsid antibody test everyone. And then we can combine these things. The PCR positivity is only going to tell us whether you had evidence of an infection at the participant decision visit, they called it. Whereas the nucleocapsid antibodies would tell you whether during the course of the trial you had probably been infected, presumably asymptomatically, because if you had symptoms, you would have gone in and said, hey, I got symptoms. I'm a suspected COVID case, PCR test me. And so if you at the end of the trial, if you had nucleocapsid antibodies, but you were not a COVID case for the vaccine efficacy part of the trial, then presumably you had been asymptomatically infected. And so they reported the results on PCR positivity, on seroconversion, they called it. That means if you're seropositive, that means that you have antibody tests that are positive in your blood. So seroconversion to antibody positivity to nucleocapsid, which is the blood evidence of some past natural infection over the course of the trial. And then they combined those into an overall result of asymptomatic infection. And then the J&J trial, they did not look at a PCR test at the end of the trial, but they did look just at seroconversion to nucleocapsid antibodies, which is the blood evidence of having a natural infection over some course of the trial, and which would, once again, if you weren't counted as a case, then you must have been an asymptomatic case if you had the nucleocapsid antibodies. Otherwise, if you had symptoms, you would have gone in, told them about it, gotten a PCR test, and been counted as a symptomatic case. I'm reporting their definitions of this stuff and how they're interpreting it. There's room for disagreement, and I'll get to my disagreement shortly. So Before the Monday march for the teachers is when I was last doing this research. I'm getting back into it today. And so on Sunday, mid Sunday, I'm reading these trials and I'm like, oh, it looks like there's protection against symptomatic infection. It's weaker than what they're reporting for asymptomatic infection. It's weaker than what they're reporting for symptomatic. So it seems like there's some effect of the vaccines on the infection here. But then I read this incredibly important paper, which I think is going to be the most important paper. And I'll show it on screen when I get to the data. But it's from Public Health. The authors are from Public Health, Madison, Dwayne County, and from CDC Atlanta. And so it's not peer reviewed yet, but the likelihood that peer review is going to overturn this because these people didn't know what they're doing is quite small. And this is not coming from a group that's skeptical of vaccination. This is coming from the Public Health Department of Madison, Wisconsin, and CDC authors. And it's called Shedding of Infectious SARS-CoV-2 Despite Vaccination. And they found well, I'll tell you what they found in a minute, but this was the paper that once I was able to reconcile all these different findings has seemed to make the case that the vaccine mandates are going to increase transmission, probably a black and white case that ends with this study. And there is research that the reason I haven't written my article yet is because there's more research that I need to look at. And so in particular, I need to look at secondary attack rates, which are studies of if you were vaccinated, were your close contacts more likely to get COVID or less likely to get COVID than the close contacts of people who weren't vaccinated. So I haven't looked at those studies yet, and I need to look at those studies. And I also want to look at some more mechanistic studies to try to make as clear as possible a case of why this works this way. And so when I do that, hopefully by the end of the week, I will have my fully referenced article available for everyone. I'll go live again to talk you through it. But right now, I want to walk you through the most critical science that I think is going to be decisive here, that has so far quickly brought me into the camp of vaccine mandates are going to increase transmission. And I want to make clear that I oppose the vaccine mandates on principle. On ideological grounds, I have nothing to do with science. And so as much as some people might think I'm biased here, I actually think that my complete opposition to the mandates on principle makes me very open-minded on this topic, because this science could show that the vaccines would reduce transmission, and I would still be marching against the vaccine mandates, and it would make no difference whatsoever, because I oppose this on the basis of my values and not on utilitarian grounds. So I'm very open-minded on what the utilitarian grounds would be here. And so therefore, I think that, everyone strives to be objective. I think I'm striving very effectively to be objective on this topic. And so if anyone disagrees with me and they want to point out why, I'm completely happy to be totally open-minded about this. Nevertheless, I'm going to show you now the science on why I think the vaccine mandates are going to dramatically increase transmission. Okay, so let's go through the facts. So fact number one, the Moderna vaccine is modestly effective at reducing PCR positivity, okay? So regardless of symptoms, the Moderna vaccine over the course of a 5.8-month follow-up reduces having a positive PCR test by 41%. That's not the absolute reduction, that is the relative reduction. I have the absolute numbers if anyone wants them, but I'm going with relative risk because that shows you the strength of the effect. So 100% would mean that no one got a PCR positive result that would have. 50% means it cut that, whatever the risk was, it cut it in half. 41% effective means that, for 100 people who would have gotten a positive PCR test, the Moderna stopped 41 of them from getting it. Okay. Result number 2, the Moderna vaccine is 94% effective against getting nucleocapsid antibodies, which means that you have a systemic blood immune response to a natural infection of a virus. Now, that alone should make you ask a question, because if it's only 41% effective against PCR positivity and it's 94% effective against nucleocapsid antibodies, that means that 59% of the people who developed the positive PCR test, their immune system found no particular reason to bother making nucleocapsid antibodies. So that tells you that while the Moderna was 41, do I have those numbers right? Those numbers are a little off. Okay, so I don't want to do the math right now, but the point is, a huge number of people if the Moderna vaccine is reducing PCR positivity weekly, but it is almost abolishing nucleocapsid antibodies, that means that the majority of people who developed a positive PCR test, their immune system found no particular reason to mount a systemic immune response. That means, first of all, that whatever cycle threshold they're using for their PCR test, or whether it's cycle threshold or not, whatever it is about their PCR test, it's not very selective at all for a person's immune system giving a shit whether it tests positive. Okay, so testing positive on the PCR test in Moderna is not a serious issue, according to the people's immune systems in the Moderna trial. So keep that in mind. The J&J vaccine, which they don't have 6-month results, they have 2-month results out because they started later. And also the J&J vaccine is only one shot, and the J&J vaccine seems to take a little bit of time for the immunity to go up. And so over the course of the trial, it seems like, whereas Pfizer 6 months, it's already waning. J&J, they only have 2 months out, and the efficacy is basically still going up during the course of the trial. So the J&J results overall are weak compared to Pfizer and Moderna, but that's probably due to the time dynamics of the trial. Because at the end of the J&J trial, the efficacy against symptomatic cases was starting to rise up to the efficacy of Moderna and Pfizer. So the lower efficacy overall is probably a result of just the fact that they don't have 6-month results out yet, but that's not the point here. So consistent with the 60-ish% of efficacy against symptomatic cases, the J&J vaccine in that trial overall is also 65% effective against developing nucleocapsid antibodies. So less effective than Moderna, but they didn't do a PCR test on everyone. And so we have no idea about the efficacy of the J&J results, the J&J vaccine against PCR positivity. Okay. So the facts are Moderna, 41% effective against PCR positivity, 94% effective against nucleocapsid antibodies, Moderna. J&J, 65% effective against nucleocapsid antibodies. We don't know about PCR. Pfizer, no idea about any of this. Okay. Now, I'm going to share my screen. And it's YouTube who's going to get the screen share, but I'll try to briefly show Instagram what we're looking at. So I'm going to share my screen. I think that's the right Chrome tab. Okay, so for Instagram folks, we're looking at this paper, Shedding of Infectious SARS-CoV-2 Despite Vaccination. It's a preprint. But you can see that, let's see if we go to info history, you can see that the authors on this paper are from the public health departments of Madison and Duane County, Wisconsin, and from CDC Atlanta. Okay, so this is not an official position of the CDC, but this is from the pro-vaccine public health authorities of Madison Public Health Departments and CDC Atlanta. So there's not anti-vaxxer propaganda, okay? All right. So this paper is nuts. So one of the valuable things that they did with this paper is they actually looked at the amount of virus that you can culture in cells and allow it to replicate. And one of the things that they did in this paper is they used low cycle thresholds on the PCR test of 25 or lower, low CT counts. Why did they do that? Well, they don't explain it in this paper because they didn't really, I think they're going to beef up this paper with more text later. But I'm going to show you two other papers for why that will shed light on why they did this. Okay, so I have too many things open. Where did my Zoom go? Zoom. Oh, I think, let's see. Okay. Zoom is telling me to log in. Oh, here it is. Okay, sorry about that. All right, I'm gonna share my whole desktop at the risk of sharing irrelevant stuff because my window is too difficult to switch around. Okay, so for people on YouTube, you should now be looking at shedding of infectious SARS-CoV-2 despite vaccination. We're switching that, and you should now be seeing me switching to YouTube and looking at the chat. And so now you should be looking at the paper, and I'll show you guys on Instagram. We're looking at the paper duration of infectiousness and correlation with RT-PCR cycle threshold values in cases of COVID-19 England, January to May 2020. And they show the data right here. So this data is what's the likelihood that you're going to be able to culture infectious virus from the person's snot based on cycle threshold value of the PCR test? And so you can see that a cycle threshold of 35 to 40 means that person has no infection in their snot, okay? A cycle threshold below between 30 and 35 means there is a low chance that this person has infectious virus in their snot. A cycle threshold of 25 to 30 means they got basically a 50-50 chance of having infectious virus in their snot. A cycle threshold below 25, however, means they almost certainly have infectious disease in their snot. Okay, people on Instagram are saying there's no sound. All right, I don't know what happened with Instagram, but I'm going to discard the video and go live again. All right. Okay, and so this is showing that basically you need a cycle threshold below 25 to have a serious guarantee of having infectious virus. If you're between 25 and 30, Bulletproof Coconut, I see you joined on Instagram. Is there sound? Because there was no sound in my last Instagram. Anyway, so cycle thresholds of between 25 and 30, you have like a 50-50 view of 50-50 probability of having infectious virus. Above that, you have basically no probability. Okay, looks like we got sound on Instagram, so great. Okay, so from that paper, from that paper, we know that you need a low cycle threshold below 25. Low cycle threshold below 25 in order to show that you have infectious virus in the nose. Okay, now this next paper is an infectivity assay for detection of SARS-CoV-2 in samples from patients with COVID-19. And I just want to bring your attention to one sentence here, which says, I'm going to highlight it here. So no infectious virus is another one where they cultured the virus to see if it was culturable, transmissible virus in the nose. No infectious virus could be detected when the CT value exceeded 30. Okay, so we have multiple studies showing that if the CT values are above 30, you are heading into total uselessness land in having infectious virus. So now that brings us back to so that's why the CDC Atlanta and Public Health Madison County people looking for infectious virus in the nose of vaccinated and unvaccinated people are using low CT values of 25 or less. It's very straightforward because that's the only way that you have any indication that there might be virus in your nose. Now we can ask the question, okay, so in the Moderna trial where they showed a reduction in PCR positivity, what was the cycle threshold? I don't know yet. I emailed both the corresponding authors on the Moderna trial to try to find out that information. What I can tell you is that in the 400 pages of the Moderna protocol, if you search for PCR, they never tell you what PCR tests that they're using. And I think the reason that that's the case is because the Moderna trial didn't standardize it at all. And in fact, like over the course of the study, so J&J and Pfizer both had a central PCR test to confirm the infection. In the Moderna trial, they did not. It seems like they did at the end for the participant visit decision, where they unblinded the placebo group and vaccinated the placebo group if they wanted it, which was 98% of them. It seems like they probably centrally tested the people there due to the design. They're coming in for the visit, they get tested. I'm not sure. They had 99 different centers. And so it's possible all those different centers were using different tests. What I can tell you is that during the confirmation of symptomatic cases in the trial, it was a mess. So they say in the paper, they say, sometimes they were testing a nasal swab. Sometimes they were testing nasopharyngeal swab. Sometimes they were testing saliva. And if the person was hospitalized, they were testing their respiratory exudate at 99 different centers with not ever mentioning what test they were using. And so hopefully the authors, I emailed them, hopefully they can clarify this for me, but it's probably the case that there is no one answer, because 99 centers were testing PCR in at least 4 different ways using who knows what tests, but probably different ones. And what's really weird is that the Moderna protocol over and over again says they will be, make statements like they'll get tested with RT-PCR or for seropositivity, in parentheses, using this specific Roche diagnostics assay. And so it's like over and over again, they say PCR or, usually in a protocol in science, you say what test it was, and you say the company, comma, the city that the company operates in. That's like standard for a scientific paper in your methods. And so in the same sentence repeatedly, they have PCR test, nothing, silence, crickets, comma, or seropositivity, parentheses, Roche diagnostics, etc., like is always done. And so, my God, I've been talking without my microphone. Oh my God, people on YouTube must have been suffering. Okay, people on, it's because I'm using my AirPods. All right, whatever. Okay, people are, all right, it looks like there's no problems on YouTube. Okay, so, all right, so anyway, so I want to show you guys. I looked up. I did find this information for what was it? It was not the. It was for the test being used in the Pfizer trial. So just as an example, I thought, okay, well, let's just take a look at what if we can find the cycle threshold being used in the Pfizer test. Let's take a look. And so let me bring that up for you. Okay, so folks on YouTube, I should be sharing my screen still, and you should be looking at Expert Express SARS-CoV-2 by Gene Expert. Is that you guys seeing that? Should be. Okay. So for people on Instagram, this is Expert Express SARS-CoV-2 by Gene Expert. Actual company name is Safid or something like that. Okay, so let's go down to, I'm just gonna look for the table where they show their limited detections. And all right, so here it is. So what you're looking at here is they're testing different concentrations of virus. So they're going up from 0 to 0.02. And this is just a measure of concentration here. And so then this is their sample size. Hit rate means like, are they detecting it? So if the hit rate is 100%, they detected 100%. They had a positive result in 100% of the cases. If the hit rate is in the 90s, they had a positive result in 90 or 95% of the cases. And so they have two different they have two different gene targets that they're trying to amplify here for detection. And so, and they use both of them to determine a positive result. And so, in this case, the one of those genes gave a 95% hit rate, the other gave 100%. But they're going to get, I believe they would get a positive result in 100%. Okay, so this, let me just keyword search this for cycle. This test runs 45 cycles. So, okay, so it says it right here at the bottom of the legend. So if it reaches the threshold before the full 45 PCR cycles have been completed, and then you can, where did that table go? Sorry, oh, here it is. Okay, and so if we come back to this, this table, the mean CT values for when they're getting a 95 or 100% detection are 35 to 41, basically 36 to 41. Okay, so basically, this can give you a positive test up to a CT value of 45, but on average, it's giving you a positive test, usually on average, somewhere between 36 and 41 cycles, okay? So let's match that back to our data on the probability of having infectious virus in your snot. So that is this value. The mean CT value of the PCR test used in Pfizer gives you a 5 out of 60 chance of having infectious virus in your snot. All right, let's calculate that. So that's an 8% chance. All right, the CT threshold used in the Pfizer study gives you an 8% chance of having infectious virus in your snot. That's why Public Health Madison and CDC Atlanta authors are using low CT values for trying to figure out whether the vaccine reduces transmission. Okay, so now let's go back to this this critical seminal paper, not peer reviewed yet, but done by public health officials who know what they're doing and have basically the raw data of everyone in the county. The shedding of infectious SARS-CoV-2 despite vaccination. So you guys on Instagram, I can't hold the camera like that while I'm going through the paper. So go to YouTube if you want the screen share. And then, or you can look that paper up by title and follow along on your own thing. Okay, so let's take a look at what they did here. So we're going to go to full text. This is nuts. This is absolutely insane data. Okay, so all right, so they observe. So what they're doing is they're taking the swabs of basically everyone who 699 swab specimens collected in Wisconsin from June 29th through July 31st, 2021, and tested by a single contract laboratory. Okay, so unlike Moderna, everything's going to one place and being tested the same way. That's an asset. Specimens came from residents of 36 counties, mostly in southern and southeastern Wisconsin. 81% of cases were not associated with an outbreak. During the time, estimated prevalence of Delta variants in Wisconsin increased from 69% to over 95%. So this is mostly Delta that we're looking at. Vaccination status was determined by self-reporting and state immunization records. So basically looking at like hundreds of tests. It's not clear whether these are all the tests or it sounds like it's all the tests from that period. And they compare, do you have low CT values? Do you have low CT values consistent with probably having infectious virus in your snot, or do you not? And then, can we culture infectious virus from your snot? Or can we not? And are you vaccinated or not? And do you have symptoms or do you not? And so here's what they found. We observed low CT values, less than 25, in 212 out of 310 fully vaccinated and 246 out of 389 unvaccinated individuals. So 68% of vaccinated have CT values associated with infectious virus in their snot. 63% of unvaccinated individuals. You heard that right. It is not statistically significant, but it's higher in the vaccinated individuals. If we look at this graph, having low CT value, being positive for a low CT value, the p-value is 0.23. So that means that it's not statistically significant. We can't say it's different. And but it's almost 4-to-1 likely true that there's a small increase in the likelihood of having a low CT PCR test indicative of an infectious virus in your snot if you're vaccinated. Very small difference, but slightly higher, possibly. Certainly not lower, okay? They go on. Testing a subset of low CT samples revealed infectious virus in 15 of 17 specimens, 88% from unvaccinated individuals, and 37 of 39, 95% from vaccinated people. So again, it looks like they don't report the p-value here. This is obviously not statistically significant. And you can see just from the way the data are spread that they're mostly overlapping. But nevertheless, slightly higher, not statistically significant, infectious virus in the nose of vaccinated people. Okay. Now, what we can conclude from this so far is that the vaccine, now remember, from the perspective of a mandate, we do not need a randomized controlled trial, okay? From the perspective of the effect on the biology of the vaccine, you want a randomized controlled trial so you can clearly get cause and effect evidence. But I titled my video here, why the mandates will increase transmission, okay? Because from the perspective of the mandate, you don't need a randomized controlled trial. The observational study is better from the perspective of the mandate because the bouncer at the door does not use a randomized controlled trial to let you in or not. The bouncer at the door does an observational study that looks at your vaccine passport and says, I'm going to use this to predict, do you have infectious virus in your snot? Okay. And so the bouncer at the door needs the observational study that says, if we take a random sample of people on the street that are or are not vaccinated, who has the infectious virus in their snot? Okay. So from the perspective of the mandate, the observational study of random people on the street is the gold standard for knowing if the vaccine passport, when you show your papers, predicts the infectiousness of that person. From the perspective of the DOE, who just fired thousands of teachers, they want the observational study that does this person having uploaded, and they didn't have to upload it, by the way, because the mayor by executive order waived the need for adults to consent to sharing their medical information with the system. And so teachers who did comply were allowed to teach without even uploading their vaccine passport because their doctor just sent it to them without their consent. But anyway, the DOE should be using this observational study to know whether someone having the vaccine passport is a predictor of whether they have infectious virus in their snot, not a randomized controlled trial, okay? So what this tells us right now is that the vaccination status tells you zero about the person's probability of having infectious snot. In fact, what it tells you is, it doesn't tell you zero. It tells you that there is no value of the vaccine passport, okay? It literally it literally confirms for you that the people you fired are every bit as safe as the people you didn't fire. It literally confirms for you that the bouncer who kicked you out with you being no more likely to spread disease than the people the bouncer let in, right? Just confirms that the passports have no value. Okay, now, what I put in my title is that the mandates are going to increase transmission risk. And now I'm gonna show you why. Okay, so now we have to get to the next part of this paper. Low CT values were detected in vaccinated people regardless of symptoms at the time of testing. CT values less than 25 were detected in 29% of unvaccinated individuals, and in asymptomatics. In asymptomatics, low CT values indicative of infectious virus were detected in 29% of unvaccinated asymptomatic people, and 82% of fully vaccinated asymptomatic people. So this is almost statistically significant because, and they don't report the p-value, but the confidence interval for the unvaccinated people is 13 to 51%, unvaccinated asymptomatic people. And the confidence interval for the fully vaccinated asymptomatic people is 48 to 97%. And so that means if you don't have symptoms and you got this test, because these overlap, 48% and 51%, they're overlapping here, but they're barely overlapping, right? So with a bigger sample, this would probably show you that asymptomatic unvaccinated people are more likely than asymptomatic asymptomatic vaccinated people are more likely than asymptomatic unvaccinated people to have infectious virus in their snot. Now, so time from symptom onset to testing did not vary by vaccination status. And then, okay, where's the, there, somewhere in here, the data is, all right, I got to look for this data. Somewhere in here, there's data on the likelihood of having symptoms. I just got to make sure I'm looking at the right data. So I'm pretty sure. Okay, no, it's that data. Okay, so I thought they had in here the number of people with infectious virus who were asymptomatic, but the way they have it presented is okay. Well, let me show you this on Instagram too, because I guess this is the most important part. So they've basically, the p-value is 0.05, which is the threshold for statistical significance under conventional standards, and so it's right on the border of statistical significance. And so for unknown symptom status, there's no difference in the likelihood of having the low CT value indicative of infectious virus. But for asymptomatics, the likelihood of infectious virus is higher for the vaccinated individuals. All right, so that's and so these lines are either the mean or the median. I'm not sure, but anyway, so the mean or median or whatever this is slightly higher. P equals 0.05. So basically what that's saying is that if we're just looking at vaccine passports, it tells you that the people have an equal probability, if they have the passport or don't, they have equal probability of having infectious virus, if that's all you know. But if you know they have no symptoms, the vaccinated people are more likely to have the low CT value indicative of infectious virus. So what does that mean? That means that people who are vaccinated are going to falsely believe that they don't spread the virus. And so an unvaccinated person is more likely to be more conservative when they believe they are infectious. They're more likely to have symptoms. And so they're more likely, if they are infected, to have symptoms. They're more likely to believe that those symptoms mean they're infectious, and they're more likely to engage in behaviors that are not going to make the virus transmit, such as staying home, such as staying further away from people, such as not going to a big crowded event. Whereas the vaccinated people are going to falsely believe that, or are more likely to falsely believe that they're not infectious because they're vaccinated. But then when they get infected, they're more likely to not have symptoms, even when they have infectious virus. And so they're more likely, even more likely to falsely believe that they can't transmit it because they don't have symptoms. And then that is likely to make them more likely to engage in behaviors that will spread the infection. And, some good evidence of that's actually playing out in the real world is that there is a positive correlation between the degree of vaccination status and the caseloads. So let me go to this last study that I'm going to show you. Let's see, where did it go? Here it is. This one's peer reviewed. And this is increases in COVID-19 are unrelated to levels of vaccination status across 68 countries and 2,947 counties in the United States. And they're unrelated, meaning it's not statistically significant, but you know, look at the direction of that line. It's, if there's a direction, then it's up. Okay, so the higher the vaccination prevalence, the higher the caseload. And the extreme outlier is Israel, who has pioneered the invasive vaccine passport that New York City and you know, certain places in California have now adopted. And Israel is the outlier up here. And you know, I'm involved in a study in Israel that got a protocol approved in 2020, got the hospitals lined up, the doctors lined up, and then the trial couldn't go on because the caseload dropped to 0 before the vaccine was available. And now Israel is the outlier in all this data, having pioneered the vaccine passport so early. And there you go. So to summarize, and then I'll go to the live chats for questions. So to summarize, and actually, I'll summarize those facts and then I'll say what I think explains them. So Moderna is 41% effective against PCR positivity. I don't know the cycle threshold, but like most of these other tests, it's probably around 35 or 40 and not indicative of infectious virus. Moderna is over 90% effective against nucleocapsid antibodies. That means that a lot of the PCR tests that are positive are not resulting in nucleocapsid antibodies and not resulting in a systemic immune response. And Moderna is disproportionately reducing the ones that would lead to the systemic immune response. J&J is 64% effective against nucleocapsid antibodies. That's the systemic immune response to natural infection. We don't know about PCR positivity. We don't know anything about Pfizer's effect on PCR positivity or nucleocapsid antibodies. Meanwhile, if you take swabs from people, and so the PCR positive results in the Moderna study are probably not indicative of infectious virus because they're probably in the 35 to 40 range, where you have an 8% chance of having infectious virus, right? So these PCR tests, if they're not using low cycle thresholds under 25, they have nothing to do with infectiousness. And that's probably what's used in the Moderna results. And that's probably what's reported in most cases of asymptomatic infection. However, Public Health Madison, Dwayne County, Wisconsin, and CDC Atlanta collaborated to do a study that's not peer reviewed yet, but appears to be the comprehensive data from the swabs collected in that county in Wisconsin over the course of a month and a half or so earlier in the year, when Delta was the dominant strain. And what it shows is that vaccination, whether someone is vaccinated or not, vaccinated people are equally likely to have infectious virus, whether using low CT count under 25 cycle threshold for PCR, or in the subset where they actually cultured the virus to prove it's infectious. Okay, zero difference whatsoever, although slightly higher in vaccinated people, infectious virus. But when you look at the people who have no symptoms, vaccinated people are significant, or statistically, it's borderline, but practically they are significantly higher likelihood of having infectious virus when they have no symptoms. And when you have no symptoms, your behavior is less likely to be protective of others. especially when you are being taught by a mandate, right? The mandate, it's not just, the mandate doesn't just take people's behavior and then filter it, right? A lot of people act like, vaccinated people do or don't do this, unvaccinated people do or don't do this. Now the mandate is just neutrally saying we're filtering the unvaccinated people out. That's not what the mandate's doing. The mandate's teaching a lesson, right? The mandate is teaching you that if you're vaccinated, it is okay to go to Broadway. It is okay to go to the football game. It is okay to go to the public swimming pool. It is okay to go to the gym. In fact, you can huff and puff at the gym. You don't need to worry because you're vaccinated. The mandate is teaching a lesson that is a lie, which is that vaccinated people are less likely to have infectious virus in their nose. And so the mandate is changing behavior. It's changing behavior through teaching the lesson, through creating a lie inside people's minds that if they're vaccinated, they don't need to worry about being in crowds. And the worst part about that lie is the vaccine is physiologically, biologically accentuating that lie by giving the vaccinated person with the same amount of infectious snot, the same likelihood of having infectious snot, is creating the physiological impression in them that by having no symptoms, they're not sick and they're not transmissive. And then the mayor and the governor and the president are conspiring with that biology to literally tell them, if you're vaccinated, doesn't matter. You're not infectious. Go do what you want. You're not like the unvaccinated people who need to be, forced to stay out of society, right? So the biology is a truth that is misleading. The truth is you have no symptoms. The misleading, it misleads you, teaches your brain a false lesson that you're not transmissive. Then the government comes out and says, you know why you're not feeling symptoms? Because you're not transmissive. That's why we're going to let you go to Broadway. And that's why they have to cancel Broadway shows like Aladdin because of breakthrough cases. And then that is reflected in the non-statistically significant positive correlation between vaccination status and caseloads, and why Israel, who pioneered the vaccine passport, is the outlier. Now, there's research I haven't looked at, and I haven't looked, for example, at the secondary attack rate. And it's my understanding that there is data showing that the secondary attack rate suggests that close contacts of vaccinated people are for some amount of time less likely to transmit into cases. Now, there's a serious behavioral confounder with the secondary attack rate. I'm going to show you what it is from data that we know from the flu. So if I Google physical Cochrane, it's the easiest way to find this paper if you don't have it bookmarked. So Googling physical Cochrane takes up the top result, a pre-COVID, well, I think it came out, it was 2020 when it came out, but it's looking at pre-COVID data. So pre-COVID data on physical interventions to interrupt or reduce the spread of respiratory viruses. And this is the paper that collects 9 RCTs that show that masks don't prevent the transmission of flu. But that's not why I'm showing you this. I'm showing you this because there is a Japanese RCT of quarantining that that I think sheds a lot of light on what would happen to the close contacts of vaccinated people. So let me just, is this the one? Okay, yes, this is the one. All right. So comparison 10, physical distancing, quarantine compared to control. We found one quasi-cluster RCT assessing the effectiveness of quarantining workers of one of 2 sibling companies in Japan whose family members developed influenza-like illness during the 2009 and 2010 H1N1 influenza pandemic. Workers in the intervention group were asked to stay home on full pay until 5 days after the household members showed resolution of symptoms on 2 days or alleviation of fever. And then here's the outcomes. Compliance with the intervention was 100%. Okay, so no compliance issues in the study altering the interpretation. In the intervention group, 2.75% of workers contracted influenza compared with 3.18% in the control group, indicating that the rate of infection was reduced by 20% in the intervention group. However, the risk of a worker being infected was 2.17-fold higher in the intervention group, where workers stayed at home with their infected family members. The authors concluded that quarantining workers who have infected household members could be a useful additional measure to control the spread of respiratory viruses in an epidemic setting. And so what that's saying is that, you know what, I have to think more about this because I'm realizing that this might not fit with the interpretation I was going to give it. So what I was going to say was there's going to be behavioral effects. So there's going to be behavioral effects that are confounding the close contacts because, and in fact, if people are choosing to get vaccinated, so I think the correlation under the mandates is going to go down. But I think prior to the mandates, when choice was the primary thing driving vaccination rates, then I think that psychologically the choice to vaccinate is going to be correlated with a high degree of conscientiousness, but a low degree of disagreeability, right? So people who are high on conscientious and high on disagreeability are the people who are like, I'm not getting vaccinated, but I'm gonna like, you know, do all these other things that protect against COVID. And so, yeah, I'm gonna stay home if I'm sick. I'm going to get some povidone iodine. I'm going to take vitamin C. I'm going to take quercetin. I'm going to get my vitamin D levels up. You know, if you have a list of 20 things that you're going to do and it doesn't include vaccination, you're high on conscientious and low on and high on disagreeability. And because you're high on conscientious, you're probably not. But your behavior, you're probably not a spreader. Whereas, you know, and also someone who's low on disagreeability, so they believe everything that public health people say, but high on conscientious, they're going to go get vaccinated, but they're also staying home when they're sick. They're also, you know, doing other things that they do believe prevents transmission. And so the high conscientiousness in these people is probably going to reduce transmission, generally speaking. And what the difference between them is where they are on disagreeability, right? And so I think in the studies that I have not looked at yet, one of the things that I'm going to be looking at is how these psychological traits dictate the choice to get vaccinated and how I would expect them to alter people's behavior. Because your behavior, whether you stay home, whether you spread infection or not, depends who you live with. And it depends, so it's your behavior plus who you live with. Because what that RCT in Japan was basically showing is that if you stay home and you're sick, you are reducing the spread to your coworkers, but you're spreading it to your family. So if you stay home when you're sick and you have no family, you're not spreading it to anyone. But if you stay home when you're sick and you have family and your family's not staying home, then you're probably spreading it to more people because you're spreading it to your family and then your family are spreading it to other people. And so I think that's a severely complicating mesh of behavioral and psychological factors that I'm going to have to look at when I look at the data on secondary attack rates. So it's going to take me a while to go through those studies and look at the methods, look at the time they were done and what's probably driving vaccination, right? Because vaccination in New York City right now is probably, vaccination in New York State among healthcare workers right now is probably driven by, oh, I'm going to get fired soon if I don't do it. You know, whereas vaccination in New York 6 months ago was driven by psychological factors over whether your conscientiousness and disagreeability. Okay, so bottom line in, vaccines do not alter the probability of having infectious virus in your nose, but they do make you less likely to have symptoms. And the mandates in particular, combined with the lower symptomaticness, teach a false lesson that it is okay to go out and mingle and not engage in transmissive behavior if you're vaccinated. So the vaccine mandate is useless to the bouncer because they're shutting out people who have equal likelihood of being infectious as the people they're letting in. The mandate is also uselessly harmful to the business because it's doing nothing to protect the people inside the business, but it is lowering their revenue. The mandate is decreasing the quality of life for everyone because it's doing nothing to filter the people who are infectious from the people who are not, but it is decreasing socialization, increasing fear of other people, and decreasing the value of the social networks you form by doing things. But to make it worse, the mandate is teaching a false lesson to the vaccinated people that you're less likely to spread it, and so therefore you need to be less careful. And because they're more likely to be asymptomatic when they are infectious, their biology is conspiring with that to alter their behavior in a way that will promote transmissibility, which explains why vaccination rates are positively but not statistically significantly correlated with caseloads, and why Israel, who pioneered the vaccine mandate, is the outlier in having the highest caseloads. Now, there's all sorts of other things I could say, and I'm not ready to make my mechanistic arguments, but just to give you a brief insight into what I'm thinking about this, I think that the vaccine is very effective at decreasing, not very, it is modestly 41% effective for Moderna at decreasing PCR positivity because it's pretty good at decreasing BS PCR positivity in the 35 to 40 CT threshold range, which tells you that you have an 8% risk of being transmissive, of having infectious virus. But then also, it's creating it's creating an immune response to the spike protein that makes you not need to mount an immune response to the nucleocapsid protein of the infection if you get sick. And that explains why both the Moderna and the J&J vaccines are very effective against nucleocapsid antibodies, why the Moderna vaccine is exceedingly effective against nucleocapsid antibodies, and why the Moderna vaccine is way more effective against nucleocapsid antibodies than against PCR positivity. And it's because you have no need of a natural immune response to the nucleocapsid antibody if you have an exceedingly high spike protein response already pre-programmed. But what matters is whether you have infectious snot. And so the mandates will increase transmission because of how they're affecting the behavior of people who have infectious snot, and their complete zero ability, right? The person with the passport is not statistically significantly, but slightly higher probability of having infectious virus in their snot, right? So it's not a hard to detect modest effect that will reduce transmission. It's confirmed zero useless effect. Okay, so let me go to the chat. I'll look at YouTube chat and then I'll look at Instagram chat. Actually, I have fewer comments on Instagram, I think. So let me go through. You know what? No, comments are easier to read on YouTube. I'll do YouTube first. Okay. Gary Britting, thanks for pulling this together. You're welcome. Sad face. The best way is to use all of the alternatives. Well, we don't have head-to-head studies, but because of my own philosophy, that's what I'm doing. Carrie Brewster says hello from Arkansas. Oh, I'm going to take screen share off for Zoom because now you guys are in some kind of meta. Looking at me, looking at the chat. Okay, so Carrie Brewster, hello from Arkansas. Your work with this and nutrients has been so helpful for our family. You're welcome, Carrie. Sad face, we don't know what the best rival platform is, but being on all of them prevents you from being typecast. Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. So, back at Monday's March, tons of people thought they couldn't live stream at all because people are trying to use Facebook and Instagram. When Instagram wasn't working for me, I used YouTube. Now that appears to be because Facebook and Instagram were down for people all over the world, but it could as easily have been that Facebook and Instagram deplatformed me at that moment, and I was still able to stream on YouTube. And so, I think ultimately the solution on deplatforming is to have cloud. So the main risk for platforms, for alternative platforms, is that if they depend on central servers of big tech companies, they can be taken down like that. So for example, Parler was taken down on the false claim that the Capitol riot, insurrection or whatever, was organized primarily on Parler, when the data show that the riot was primarily organized on platforms owned by Google and Facebook, including YouTube, and that a small percentage occurred on Parler. And so that false claim was used to bully the big tech companies from taking the app off the hardware, but also AWS from getting them off the servers. So if your alternative platform is pro free speech but uses AWS for its servers, your free speech platform is very vulnerable. And so someone who suggested Odyssey got me very interested in. I was interested in that until I watched some videos on it or listened to them while I was cleaning my apartment. This guy Lutke was big on there, and then some other people have made videos on YouTube about what Lutke was saying. But basically, I have serious questions about Odyssey's corporate direction for marketing and what they're trying to turn the platform into. They seem to be very interested in getting short-term benefit from actively turning it into a cesspool of vulgarity. And the people in charge of that decision were extremely vulgar and rude to the people who tried to politely suggest otherwise, because Lutke was in on their team because he was so big on their platform. So I don't like their platform, but what Odyssey taught me was we should be, whatever the alternative platform is, it has to be built on some kind of BitTorrent-like technology where peer-to-peer file sharing eliminates the need for central servers. So right now I'm very interested in Mastodon and PeerTube. I'm not saying I'm going to move there, but I'm interested in the idea of a decentralized federation of peer-to-peer network, non-central server mediated social media groups. And I don't know what to think about those specific platforms yet, but I believe that technology is the way. And I will probably get on more alternative platforms beyond Telegram right now. But I do not. But Telegram, I have serious doubts about Telegram now that they basically take orders from the Russian government on shutting down electoral aids to Putin opposition candidates on Telegram. That's very concerning for the future of free speech on Telegram, and it just goes to show you that we can't trust centralized companies to favor free speech, because when push comes to shove, the little guys are more dependent on the big guys. If they're Parler using AWS servers as an example, and the free speech guys are just as vulnerable to the bullying of the Russian government. So I don't know why, remember Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Google got called in to testify before the US federal government 4 times in 2020 under the constant threat of being broken up by antitrust legislation and numerous Section 230 re-engineering of how they're regulated. And antitrust is not a threat to the little guys. It's a threat to the big guys. And even this Section 230 is probably mostly of concern to the big guys who could get, big lawsuits over their content and stuff. And so the fact that Facebook and Instagram have been egregious in some ways and yet have held out by constant threats from the federal government. Remember, the Dirty Dozen, right? Kevin Jenkins, Mercola, and these other guys were called out by White House Press Secretary Psaki. They were called out by the White House saying, you, all four of you, should ban these people permanently. And there should be no discrepancy between the four of you, big tech platforms. And they, they haven't done that. They haven't band together in a cabal to universally, simultaneously, completely deplatform the entire Dirty Dozen. And despite the fact that the federal government is on their case, right? And so I don't like big tech, but they've been under more threat from the US federal government to censor vaccine skepticism with, real bullying that is illegal under case law settled by the Supreme Court. Real bullying that is real First Amendment violation, and they have caved, but they haven't caved completely. And Twitter has been doing a better job than Facebook, Instagram, and Google. And Jack Dorsey, contrary to the ridiculous actions of some of the Twitter safety committee, Jack Dorsey testified before the US federal government and said, I'm sorry, but I don't think it's our job to determine truth, right? So it's not clear to me that Telegram is better at standing up to government bullying than the big tech companies are. And so I'm on Telegram now because that's where a hotbed of activity is taking place among people who are pro free speech. But I put no trust in Telegram. And I put no trust in anyone who uses AWS servers. And there's just the future of free speech will be peer-to-peer file sharing, BitTorrent based technology to eliminate central servers. And if the alternative platform is free speech but not based on that infrastructure, they might be the present of free speech, but they're not the future of free speech. Okay. Troy says camera's bouncing back up and down a bit. It was probably me who was bouncing up and down because I got excited. I'm sorry about that. Camera's not bouncing up and down unless I was moving it because it's my laptop resting on a stand. So the Highlander brings up another point that I didn't mention. Highlander says the vaccines will increase transmission because people who are vaccinated are more likely to not wear masks and be more confident that they're safe and take more risks and the vaccines are leaky. So I didn't even mention that. The CDC guidance that says wear a mask if you're not vaccinated, don't wear a mask if you are, and the store signs that say you need a mask to enter if you're not vaccinated are all teaching people the lie that if they're vaccinated, they don't, regardless of what masks do, right? The mask is a symbol of your agreement with public health information and your conscientiousness to reduce risk, okay? People who are high on agreeability, I'm high agreeability, high conscientiousness. So, I'm high on disagreeability, high on conscientiousness. And so I'll take a picture of me not wearing a mask in the subway system when they just doubled the fines and post it on social media. But I walk around with betadine nasal spray or povidone iodine and zinc acetate lozenges in my backpack. So I'm high on conscientiousness too. So anyway, wearing a mask is a symbol that you are agreeable and conscientious. And so when they teach you that your symbol of conscientiousness can be taken off if you've done the one conscientious thing, right? The one thing. If you did the thing, you are so conscientious that you no longer need the other thing. You no longer need the other symbol of your conscientiousness. So you also don't need anything else because you did the one thing. That's the lesson of wear the mask if you're unvaccinated. Don't wear it if you're not vaccinated, right? They are actively teaching the lesson that the lie that you're less transmissible if you're vaccinated. Samuel says, I have some weird symptoms. My penor is throbbing. What is this? I'm sorry. I believe I just read some spam. The Highlander says vaccines lose effectiveness over time, which result in them being more leaky, hence more transition. So that the evidence on reduced transmission is all from Pfizer. The Moderna seems to have some waning transmission, but it is nowhere near the waningness of Pfizer, and that's probably due to the higher dose. It's 100 micrograms versus 30 micrograms. RNA is a little bit different, so I don't know if that's directly comparable. But Moderna's more durable than Pfizer. But even Moderna believes that their vaccine will wane over time. In their 5.8 month follow-up study that just came out, they said, what did they say? They said we don't have a good sample of breakthrough cases yet, but we'll have one later when the people in the trial all become many become breakthrough cases due to waning efficacy. Then we'll be able to do our study of the correlates of a breakthrough infection. Sorry, that wasn't their 6 month follow-up. It was their other paper, the third paper that they came out with, correlates of immunity. So everyone believes that the efficacy will wane, but the rapidly waning efficacy is from the Pfizer vaccine. Raul Duke says, thanks for what you're doing, Chris. You're welcome. Tupperware says, agree about the bouncing. The Highlander says, Geert Vanden Bosch has been talking about this. Wish Chris could talk with him. Well, once I finish with this research, that would be a great time to have a podcast with him. Maybe I can reach out to him at that time, because then we'll be able to have a discussion as two people very familiar with the transmission research. Him obviously having way more expertise than I do, but I think one of my values that I have in an interview that other people don't have is that I, as the interviewer, can be, apply my expertise and research analysis to having a conversation that's roughly of equals, rather than just being kind of an outlet for these people to make their case, which is great. But I know that they do that all the time, right? And so I think they'd be happy to have something that was an interview of their opinion, but was kind of more like a panel discussion. Troy Morris says, thank you for streaming. Your camera is bouncing up and down. I'm pretty sure it was me bouncing up and down because I get excited. I'm sorry about that. No Name says, it's strange the government wants. Oh, you know what it might have been? It might have been when I was holding the camera for Instagram to see the screen share. So sorry, I'm just trying to reach as many people as I can. No Name says, it's strange that government wants to force people for an ineffective vaccine. I can only assume that they are testing how far they can go with the people so they can get total control for something we're far worse later. I agree with your second point, but not your first point. So the vaccine's not ineffective. I say this as someone who is not vaccinated, has no plans of getting vaccinated, and has serious concerns about their long-term safety. But I don't want my side of the political argument to be making scientific arguments that aren't true. It's not true that the vaccine. Instagram's pausing due to poor. Instagram had a poor connection, so let me go live again. So it's not true. Oh no, that means that I lost all the Instagram questions. All right. Well, anyway, I'll let the Instagram know and then go and keep going on YouTube. So it's not true that the vaccine is not effective. because the vaccines are effective against symptomatic infection, and they're effective against developing symptoms, and they are effective against serious illness. Now, as I made the case in my "There's More Than One Way to Skin a Cat" video, there are other ways to achieve the same results, and we should have the freedom to choose how we do that. And I'm not ready to write about it or speak about it yet, but I do have questions about the vaccine safety, especially over the long term, but also in the general population versus the trials. And it's what I'm making the point here is they're not effective against having infectious virus in your nose. And so they're not effective from the perspective of what the government is saying that the mandate is to protect. So when Kamala Harris says we need the vaccine to protect the unvaccinated, it's not just silly on the basis of, hold on one second, let me get this sticker. So I got this from Freedom Fighters International they're on Instagram as Freedom Fighters International, I think. And it says, remember to get vaccinated, otherwise a vaccinated person might get sick from the virus they got vaccinated against because you're not vaccinated. It's not just silly due to that basic logic. It's also, now it's clear that it's the case that you're not even filtering the probability of someone having infectious virus. But it's important not to go around saying the vaccine's not effective, because when you say that, you make your argument very vulnerable to first of all, someone who's familiar with the research data dismissing you, but second of all, people convincing other people. If you say that in public and then someone else says, hey, I repeats you, or says, hey, this video said this, someone can come back and just show them the results of these clinical trials, and they're going to be like, oh, I guess that person didn't know what they were talking about. So I think you should frame the argument as the primary argument should be framed with the best arguments, and the best argument is that the best argument is that the vaccines are not effective against protecting other people from you, and they're not the only way for you to reduce your risk of hospitalization. So you should be free to reduce your risk of hospitalization however you see fit, and make a personal decision when this thing that they're forcing on you does nothing for the health of other people. And then if you want to get further into the weeds, you can say, well, the vaccine efficacy declines over time. Well, the vaccine efficacy has to be compared against the vaccine safety. And this is what we know about vaccine safety. But the core of the argument about the mandate should be the efficacy against transmission, and the efficacy of filtering out people who are infectious versus not, because we want our arguments to be solid enough that people can't refute them. And that's what presently looks not refutable. But I agree with you that they're testing how far they can go with people so they can get total control for something or something far worse later. I think that's very clear. So Instagram is, so hopefully people on Instagram who are witnessing my live go dead know enough to come to YouTube. But anyway, just go to my Instagram and scroll through my profile till you see the guy with the bald head, or go to Twitter and search from Chris Masterjohn Foster, and you'll find the 6-minute clip I made of totally public knowledge, publicly broadcast House Banking and Financial Services Committee of Jay Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, and Jenny Yellen, the Secretary of the Treasury, testifying before the committee, and them talking about that having a legally authenticable digital ID that constitutes your legal identity that crosses international borders and also acts as the wallet in which you have your money, which will be a new currency issued by the Federal Reserve and not the US dollar, which will be tied directly to your vaccination status, and I quote, you name it. And so they are not hiding that this is the entry point for that. They are talking about it on publicly broadcast, public information at the highest levels of the United States government. That they are not hiding the fact that the mandate is the entryway for a new digital international legal ID with a new currency tied to your vaccination status and all of your other behavior that the government deems justified. They are fully open about it. And so it is not speculation or conspiracy theory. And if a conspiracy has to be done in secret, it's not a conspiracy. If a conspiracy can be done in the open, then you could call it a conspiracy. But if you require a conspiracy to be done in secret, it's not even a conspiracy. It's just the open proceedings of the government. The son of Krypton says love and support from UK. Thanks, folks on Instagram. I may have lost the chat from the previous video. If you had questions that you haven't gone over to YouTube and re-ask them in the chat, because I lost the chat when the Instagram live went to trash. The son of Krypton says love and support from the UK. Jessica Lindsay sends emojis. Thank you guys. I appreciate your love. Paula Yola says yes, we see this. Craig Health, yes, we see this. Mockingbird sends a heart with a plus. Thank you, Mockingbird. Love back at you. Mockingbird's Wilderness of Mirror says, as vaccines went up, so did variants. Makes sense, as mandates will go up, so will cases. As Israel noted, vaccinated have higher chance of case over unvaccinated. Yeah, I mean, it is true. So the variants, what's not true is that the variants did not occur post-vaccine. What is true is that the prevalence of the variants skyrocketed. So the line goes like, I don't know if you're seeing this backwards or forwards, but whatever. From my perspective, the line goes going forward in time. The line goes up a little bit with the variants, and then hockey sticks up December 2020, where the mutations existed before that. So the variants were there, but the landscape of the genes of the virus was restructured through the selective pressure, presumably of the vaccines, to make the prevalence of the existing variants skyrocket. And so that doesn't prove cause and effect, but it's circumstantial evidence that could be interpreted as a vaccine prevalence driving selective pressure to increase the prevalence of mutations. So if you're joining Instagram now and you were there before, you asked a question, you got to ask it again because I lost the chat. Tyler Woodward says, yo, Chris, they muted you on Instagram. I'm back on Instagram now. I don't know whether they did it or whether it was just a glitch. I was having terrible reconnectivity problems with YouTube and Facebook through a restream, and had to go to Zoom to get on. So I don't know. I don't know if it's glitches in connection or if it's a coordinated thing. I don't know. I don't care because I'm just going to keep publishing stuff. I'm just going to keep being honest and transparent and saying what I think. Paula Yola says, aren't the various PCR tests doing different numbers of cycles? Probably. That's why I have emails out to let me check quickly if they answered me. That's why I have emails out to the two corresponding authors of the Moderna paper to ask them what the cycle threshold levels were for their tests. And as of when I started the video, they hadn't gotten back to me. So let me just quickly check and make sure they still haven't. But yeah, I mean, so part of the problem is in the Moderna paper, they probably weren't using the same test for everyone. So no one's gotten back to me yet. So in the Moderna paper, they probably weren't using the same test for everyone. And therefore, their cycle thresholds might be all over the map as far as we know it. Mockingbird's Wilderness of Mirror says Israeli doctor Kobi Haviv, 95% of serious ill patients are vaccinated. Fully vaccinated patients account for 85-90% of hospitalizations. So I don't know what that Israeli doctor is, but Israel has very good national data, and so I'll show you how to access it. So I'll share my screen. 1 second. All right, so I'm sharing my screen. The way that you access it is you type in Israel dashboard. So I'll try to show people on Instagram this. You want to do this in Chrome because in Chrome you can take advantage of Google's automatic translation, and it's because it's all in Hebrew. So you click on the first result of Israel dashboard search, and then number 1, cases and deaths dashboard. Doesn't seem to be loading right now. I'm going to put Instagram down for a second so I have 2 hands. Try to open a new tab. Okay, I can't get into the dashboard. Anyway, you want to do that on Chrome, and you click on that link, and if it's working, Chrome will prompt you to translate it into English, and so you just click on English, and then you can look at Israel's data. So I don't know if that data is correct, but I would use Israel's national data because they have really good complete data sets that's better than a doctor's personal data set at their hospital. And so one thing you have to keep in mind is that this data does not, when you look at the percentage, so from what I've seen, a slight majority of deaths in Israel are, last I looked at, that they were a slight majority in vaccinated, and that majority seemed to be shrinking as more people got boosters. And then in Britain, in the UK, the way you get that data is you just go to Google and you type in PHE technical briefing, which stands for Public Health England. So let me share my screen here. Share to you guys on Instagram. So you type in PHE technical briefing, and you go to the top. I think it's the top result, and then they list the briefing. So I haven't looked at this one. This is the one I usually look at. So, oh, I see. It looks like they're expanding different things that they have. So the one I usually look at is a technical briefing 23, but it looks like they also have the data, underlying data. So that might be interesting to check out. And so that generates a PDF, and then you can go down. Once you get familiar with this, you kind of know where everything is because each report is the same. So if you go to the table with the deaths within 28 days in Delta, it's the last row of that table. And so we have unvaccinated in the last column, and then fully vaccinated post 2 weeks there. And then you can just so partially vaccinated people are over here. I prefer to exclude them because their immunity status is controversial. So we know that everyone agrees in public health that if you're 2 weeks past your second dose, then you're fully vaccinated. And so I prefer to just ignore the partially vaccinated people, take these two numbers, add them together, and then take the percentage. And so actually it looks like the deaths are starting to become slightly less for fully vaccinated people. That wasn't true in technical briefing 22. So in technical briefing 22, now these aren't all-cause mortality. This is deaths attributed to the Delta variant. right? And so you can, so here we had like almost twice as many deaths in the vaccinated group than the unvaccinated group, 1,091, 536. And so this data is always in flux, and that has to do with the fact that not only is the variant mix changing, but different things are going around with the vaccination rates and stuff like that. But you have to keep in mind that you can't calculate vaccine efficacy from these raw data. And if you do, you can make an argument that sounds good, but people are going to shoot you down. You're not going to convince people who listen to both sides, and you're not going to convince people who are familiar with the data, and people are going to shoot you down over the Simpson paradox, which is that if you vaccinate all the high-risk people, because of their high risk, the vaccinated people are the people with the high risk, and so they're going to have more problems. And so you have to adjust that data for demographics vaccinated and for comorbidities in order to calculate vaccine efficacy. And so it's, however, it's true that anyone who says there's a pandemic of the unvaccinated is a liar and a propagandist, because you can see from any of those numbers that there's slight majorities, or in the last briefing in UK, it was 2/3 of the people dying were vaccinated. Now it's changing, so that a slight majority are unvaccinated. But even if a slight majority are unvaccinated, if 40-something% are vaccinated, it's still a blatant lie to call it a pandemic of the vaccinated, clearly. And so don't go around using that to calculate the efficacy on the raw data. You're going to get torn apart by people who are good with data. But it is valid to point out that this is not a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Tommy Sandelier says, do we know that this data is largely from Delta cases? In Wisconsin, over the course of when the data was collected, Delta increased from 65% to 95% of cases. So they're not all Delta, but they're predominantly Delta, and they're in the transition from 2/3 Delta to mostly Delta. Daniel Crawford says pretext for techno control grid. Obviously, I mean, they're very open about it. Look at, again, I direct everyone to the 6-minute clip I made in my Instagram profile. Scroll down to the guy with the bald head, or search Twitter from Chris Masterjohn space Foster, and you'll see the 6-minute clip of the highest levels of the U.S. federal government talking about how this is the pathway to an internationally operable digital ID that is your legal identity, that is tied to a new currency, that is directly tied to your vaccination status, and quote, you name it. Tupperware, if you need unvaxxed friends in New York City, you should probably just come to one of these vaccine mandate protests and say, hey everybody. And I have a link in my video that I made of Monday's march. There's links to get in touch with other people in the movement. All right, I'm looking through the live chat here. Instagram, if you asked a question before, you need to re-ask it on this thing. If you asked it before Instagram crashed, you need to re-ask it because I lost the chat. Mockingbird's Wilderness of Mirror says a 2 weeks date is set to hide the vaccine's deaths just after the jab. I don't. It's set based on the efficacy data from the trials showing that efficacy goes up over time. So I I think that people who have one dose or are less than 2 weeks after their full dose should be in their own category of partial vaccination. I do think that it's duplicitous, misleading, and propagandistic to call them unvaccinated. But there is a legitimate rationale for separating them from the fully vaccinated. Rosalind says, if this gets removed, where will it be? Well, it's, I think Zoom's recording it. So I'll post it everywhere. Pretty sure Zoom's recording it. Well, we'll find out. Hopefully this is everywhere. It doesn't matter. I can go do this again. And I'm writing an article on this soon anyway. So, yeah, sorry guys, I totally forgot to get my good mic when I did this video, and so I'm using my AirPods. Andrew Clancy says, so the solution is vaccination, continuing precautions like masking, distance. Solution to what? If the solution is to spread, then vaccination is irrelevant. If the solution is to not get ill, not wind up in the hospital, then there are many things at your disposal that could or that may or may not include vaccination. You should have that choice. But you're totally missing the point if you think vaccination is part of the solution to prevent the spread. We're talking, I mean, vaccinated, at least, we can at least say that filtering vaccinated people from unvaccinated people in society is not going to prevent the spread. The data are clear on that. Same amount of people have infectious virus in their nose, more if they're asymptomatic. Mockingbirds, Wilderness of Mirrors, data shows vaccine isn't working nor mask nor distancing. Don't say that the vaccines don't work. I mean, if you can say whatever you want, but if you say that, people are just going to easily refute you by citing any of the clinical trials. So you don't have to be as nuanced and sophisticated as I am, but your sound bites should be not easily refutable. And if your sound bite is vaccines don't work, it only takes one thing that they work against in one context to prove you wrong. Mockingbirds Wilderness of Mirror says decades of doctors have said that masks don't work on virus. Who cares what doctors say? Evidence is what matters. And if you Google, I showed you this before, but if you Google Cochrane physical, click on the top link, you'll see the Cochrane meta-analysis that has the 9 randomized controlled trials showing that masks don't alter the transmission of flu. People will shoot back that that's because they don't have enough compliance. But if you make a public health recommendation, it doesn't matter what your intentions were. It matters what people do with that. And if what they do is partially comply, then that's the effect of the public health rule. And so that is correct. That's what the data showed prior to COVID. Lucas Sunny says the vaccine is beneficial, but we still need to be careful. It depends what you mean by beneficial. If you mean it is beneficial to filter unvaccinated people from vaccinated people in order to reduce spread, I think the data that I showed you earlier totally contradict that. If you mean beneficial because they reduce the risk of serious illness, then, whenever you look at a benefit, you want to look at a risk-benefit ratio, but the clinical trials show that that's true. It's not looking at the risk part of it, but it's showing that it's true. Tommy Sandelier says, this is lights out data for mandates. How quickly do you think it will get covered, discredited? Well, my fear would be that, because it's in preprint now, right? Which doesn't mean anything. A peer review paper can get retracted. But my fear would be someone higher up says to the CDC Atlanta author, what were you doing publishing that? You got to take your name off that. this might be true, but it's a public health threat, and then they retract it. That would be my biggest fear right now. But if they retract it, there should be a lawsuit against them and a FOIA request for the data. And so I think that's the protection. So if anyone watching this is in with legal teams, I think that you should have your eye on that paper and be ready, be prepared to issue a FOIA request and a lawsuit if that paper gets retracted to subpoena the raw data that it was based on. I think that's the solution. Craig Hell, Pfizer asks US to allow COVID shots for kids ages 5 to 11. Do you disagree? Well, the Swedish government disagrees. Swedish government just, oh wait, no, that's not true. Sorry, Swedish government disagreed with Moderna doing that and is using Pfizer. No, this is the issue with kids, okay? Why is the risk of side effects higher for kids? And why is the risk of COVID worse for older people who are unvaccinated? The protection that you want from COVID is mucosal, which means that it's the mucous membranes of the eyes, nose, mouth, and throat. Natural infection produces IgA antibodies, which are not inflammatory there, which mop up the virus 7 to 15 times more effectively than all other antibodies, but do not elicit inflammation. Children have very good immunity, and they have very good mucosal immunity, and they have very strong systemic immunity compared to elderly people, okay? Children have such high exposure to germs in general that they have constant stimulation of their mucosal immunity. If a child gets a natural case of COVID, not even that, if a child gets a natural exposure to COVID virus or possibly even dead fragments on surfaces, the child will have a very good mucosal response that will prevent the spike protein from ever being in their blood. That child, once primed, will probably have their mucosal IgA response to COVID, technically SARS-CoV-2, the virus, stimulated over and over again when they come into contact with levels below the minimal infectious dose and fragments of dead virus possibly on surfaces. And so they will spend the next 20 or 30 years being exposed to the virus or its fragments, getting booster exposures to the mucosal immunity, making it on fire by the time that they're 15, 20 years old, to make sure they never, ever, ever get spike protein in their blood. Side effects are probably caused by getting spike protein in your blood and having an IgG or other non-IgA immune response to it that stimulates the inflammatory processes. The vaccine is designed to primarily produce an IgG response. The vaccine is designed to produce a response to the spike protein systemically in your blood. The vaccine is designed to guarantee that you have inflammatory antibodies to the spike protein in your blood. Okay? So for a child, now that's point one. The child natural infection is unlikely to get spike protein in the child's blood unless they have immune problems. And the vaccination will guarantee spike protein in the blood. The natural immunity will stimulate non-inflammatory IgA, primarily as first defense. Vaccine will stimulate inflammatory IgG. Okay. So why is it that the kids are going to get a worse response to the systemic inflammatory IgG than elderly people would? Because kids have a stronger systemic immune system. And so if kids get 30 micrograms of Pfizer, or even if it's adjusted for body weight, but it's not adjusted for their stronger immunity, then compared to the elderly getting 30 micrograms of Pfizer in a dose, or 100 micrograms of Moderna, 100 micrograms of Moderna is not 100 for 65-year-olds, not 100 micrograms for the kid. And even if you adjust it by body weight, you're not adjusting it for the inflammatory response. And so I think the kids are overdosing on immune exposure. Their systemic IgG response, I think, is being overstimulated compared to older people. And so on mechanistic grounds, I think that and I think the data on side effects back this up, and there's problems with how complete they are and how stimulated by media they are and how underreported they are. But the data on side effects back up that the risk reward ratio is far worse for kids than for elderly people. And I think that's why. I think basic logic and immunology says it is an extraordinary claim requiring extraordinary evidence to say that we should be vaccinating 5 to 11-year-olds who don't have clear mitigating factors that make them as individuals specifically likely to die over the next 6 months of COVID, okay? So if you have a kid who you can identify that individual for particular reasons is probably going to die of COVID in 6 months, then you have a case for vaccinating that kid. But in general, for 5 to 11-year-olds, it's an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence, in my view. Okay, I lost my place in these comments. I don't know why. All right, I've been doing so much YouTube that I'm just gonna visit Instagram for a while, and I'm gonna go up backwards on each. Joshua Brown Wellness, kids are close to zero risk as we can get. That's correct. It's not zero, but it's close. Coach Chris 91, do you know of any marches, protests, ways to make a difference on the West Coast? You probably want to start out looking at Make Americans Free Again, which has chapters in each state or in many states. And they might not be organizing the marches, but they would probably know who is. Cam Piner says, just got first dose 5 minutes ago, still pissed, work made me. You should be pissed, it should be your choice. And I'm sorry you had to go through with that. Susan Marie Leona says, if you had to get the vaccine, which one would you get? I wouldn't get it, and I'm not going to make recommendations to anyone. But what I would say is that Pfizer has the worst durability. Adenoviral vectors like J&J seems to have the worst risk of clotting. mRNA vaccines in general seem to have the worst risk of Bell's palsy, which is rare and appears to also be caused by COVID and also to be caused by stress. And so it appears that the vaccine causes it, but so does COVID, and so does 2020 and 2021. So right now, I would be, if you're if you're leaning on durability and not wanting boosters, then I think Pfizer makes more sense. If you're at elevated risk of clotting, then I think the mRNA vaccines make more sense. And if you're at worse risk of neurological problems, then I think J&J makes more sense. I mean that's all I can say. So that's not a recommendation, and I'm not getting it, but that's my current thought process, and don't take that as medical advice. I'm not a medical doctor. It's not medical advice. Okay, I'm gonna go back to YouTube. I lost my place, so I'm just gonna like scroll up to some random place that I know I haven't read yet. Oh, I found my place. Okay, so I almost found my place. Oh yeah, here it is. Craig Health says Finland joined Sweden and Denmark in limiting Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. I knew about Sweden. I didn't know about Finland and Denmark. That's interesting. That's for kids, I'm assuming, or in general. I don't know. Jan 2052 says definition of SARS-1 was positive test plus symptoms. Definition of SARS-CoV-2 is positive PCR only. That's true for being counted as a case in the CDC data. Their data for positive tests are almost the same as their data for cases, but it's not true in the clinical trials. They were only looking at symptomatic cases. Okay. Just going through the live chat. Giant 2052 says Duke University confirmed both vax and unvax have the same percent of asymptomatic infection over 21,000 people tested. The question is, how did they define asymptomatic infection? If they didn't use a low CT count or subsample infectious virus that's culturable, then the Madison County data trumps that, which has a borderline statistically significant increase in vaccinated people of asymptomatic infection. Giant 2852 says they act like immunity is only antibodies. What about natural T killer cells, macrophage, LDL, vitamin D? Antibodies is only a small factor. Well, even that is missing the point. Natural immunity cannot be measured with blood tests. Natural immunity is mucosal, secretory, dimeric, and pentameric IgA. And if you're not measuring that, you have no handle on natural immunity. C. Quenhan says, so what do we do now? Take this info to the court? My school is requiring the vax. You absolutely should take this info to the court. And like I said before, if that gets retracted, there should be lawyers ready to FOIA the raw data and to sue to subpoena it. C. Quenhan says, love your shirt. Thank you. Had it made myself. I also have I'm turning all my favorite chants from the marches into t-shirts. I got a hold on. I got the vaccine you won't force my body, my choice. That's one of my favorites because it's hard not to dance to it. The vaccine you won't force my body, my choice. The vaccine you won't force my body, my choice. The vaccine, you know. So anyway, and then I got a red, white, and blue one coming in. It's being made right now. That's red, white, and blue lettering, or red shirt, white and blue lettering, thick white outline. We the people will not comply. We the people will not comply. We the people will not comply. I think it's on Instagram. I think it's Mr. Drummond who does the drumming at the. I think it's him who does the drumming at the marches. You should follow him because he makes the chants so much better with the and cowbells and stuff. Mike, I am looking into Libry, LBRY, which is Odyssey. I was talking about it before, and that was based on that. People are talking in the comments about the Facebook whistleblower being a plant sent to encourage more censorships. I mean, that was Zuckerberg's reaction to the shutdown, right? Was now he wants the government to monitor, to legal. So Zuckerberg's response to the Facebook shutdown is that he wants the government to now have a way to have companies verify kids' ages. So Zuckerberg's response is like, we effed up big time, and the solution is to increase our capabilities to take people's private identifiable information from them. Daniel, yes, library is library run. So Odyssey is a platform that runs on BitTorrent but they have a token that is run. So, okay. So LBRY is a peer-to-peer file sharing information storage and access platform that is decentralized and doesn't depend on central servers, run by a private company, run by the same people as Odyssey, which is a YouTube-like platform that runs on it. Now, although LBRY is decentralized and peer-to-peer, there's two problems with it. Because Odyssey is a company, they have a corporate marketing direction. And because, so Instagram, you got paused because my battery was running out, but I just plugged it into charge. So hopefully it's still working. So, so there's two problems with it. Odyssey has a corporate marketing direction, and just do a YouTube search for Odyssey Ludkey and listen to this guy's experience with their marketing decisions to make Odyssey into a cesspool of vulgarity, and how they treated him when he tried to politely suggest they do otherwise. I mean, just check that out for why they have a problem with their marketing thing. The other problem that they have is that they have a blockchain. They have an altcoin that they ICO'd with, which that's an initial coin offering that's based on a oh, Instagram has no sound. I'm going off and going back live again. Every time Instagram pauses and every time Instagram pauses, it loses sound for some reason. So, okay, so Odyssey's infrastructure, LBRY, they had an initial coin offering, which is like an IPO, where a company first offers sales of shares to the public. The difference is an IPO, you're selling stock, and you registered it with the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. With an ICO, you're selling stock and you're pretending you're not selling stock, so you didn't register with the SEC. So the SEC is going after them for selling unlicensed securities. And there's no way they're going to win in this battle. And so their response is basically to just drum up the crypto community to agree that the SEC is wrong. But during that time, their coin lost all of its value. Now, I don't care about owning their coin, so I don't care about monetizing their platform either. But the reason to use Odyssey as a platform instead of just like raw BitTorrent file sharing is so you can get discovered by people. And if the way people make money is with the coin, and if their battle with the SEC has made the coin lose all of its value relative to the US dollar and relative to Bitcoin, then the prospects for creators and because their marketing strategy is to not promote anyone except the people with no followers who are just saying the most vulgar things imaginable, then their marketing policy and the fact that their main means of monetization has become worthless because of their battles with the SEC means that the creator network is in peril and has very dim prospects for the future, which means that the future of discoverability on Odyssey is pointless. And so I'm not going to join Odyssey unless they settle that stuff. At least have a public statement apologizing or explaining the vulgarity thing, but also they have to. I mean, I'm not going to go on there until they finish their case to the SEC because I don't care about monetizing their platform. But if no one else can monetize, I don't want to be in with a dying platform that no other good creators want to be on. Yeah, I'm looking into Mastodon. Jan 2052, I do have pay for content on my membership site. And I know I have a website that can't be deplatformed, but that's not true, right? Anything that relies on central servers instead of peer-to-peer file sharing is in a worst case scenario very vulnerable to being shut down. Bacon Grease Goddess, I'm in Florida, so thankful for your research. You're lucky, but and you're welcome. And just for people who don't live in New York and don't have these mandates, or California, remember, the virus is here. It's irrational public health policy with entry points for digital passports on all kinds of behavior. Virus is here. New York is your nose. We are your immune system. So if you live somewhere else, be our supportive nutrients, please. Daniel Crawford, those hearings were theater. Antitrust is dead. Those political parties are paid the techno monopolies. Google more powerful than many countries. Google is doing the bidding of the federal government. And so, yeah, you can say they're theater, but they're government bullying of the tech companies. Just look what the tech companies are doing. They're complying. Thomas Kamlowski says, oh, by the way, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was Secretary of State, I think, under Carter, and was a politically active and respected by the elite for a long time after that. He wrote a book in 1970, and I forgot the name of it. America in the Technotronic Age, maybe? I don't know. He wrote an essay and he also wrote a book. In his book, he basically says that we're moving into an era where the government and the big private companies will become so fused together that no one will be able to know who is oppressing them. And therefore, the masses of humanity will be reduced to the futility of confusion. So we can argue about whether Google has the power or Pelosi has the power, but look, you can look at government is the military and police arm of the big tech companies, or the big tech companies are the speech infringing arm of the government. But at the end of the day, it's hard to tell who's who because of what Brzezinski said 50 years ago. And so I don't see the point in arguing about it. I mean, the government's violating free speech through the tech companies as their enforcement. Tech enforces speech and access. Government enforces guns and jails. And together, that's a lot of power controlling guns, jails, speech, and access to information. Who cares who's really calling the shots? Thomas Kamlowski, have you seen Rhonda Patrick's video where she and others counter-argumented against the claims like ADE occurrence, virus load being similar and unvaxxed and side effects are underrated? Any opinion on that? I haven't seen Rhonda Patrick's video. I'm a paying member of her thing, and I just haven't had time to jump in on her Q&As. But I've noticed that she systematically only publishes like pro-vaccine information, which is weird because I mean, a nod to natural immunity would just make her infinitely more convincing of objectivity. But I mean, there is no claim of ADE yet. Even Malone, who's the most concerned and knowledgeable about that, is just saying it's hypothetical at this point, and there's some, starting to be some indications maybe, but there's no clinching evidence on ADE. Whether the side effects are underreported or overreported is no one arguing about that has any idea what they're people are mostly saying BS who claim to know whether they're underreported and overreported. I mean, what we know is that because if the reporting system doesn't capture them all, you can't know the real rate, right? And so that's going to be settled by lawsuits and FOIA requests for just the raw data of who is dying within certain timeframes after their shots, being analyzed by biostatisticians that are willing to engage with lawyers challenging the data. That is who will fact check this. And so right now, AirPods died.
I have to make sure my sound is working. So my sound, I'm trying to make this come from my mic. Okay, my computer says. My computer says my sound is working. Just going to check my Zoom preferences, make sure it's using the right mic. It is. Okay, so if you're on YouTube, the sound should be even better now. If you're on Instagram, it's probably the same as it was before-ish. Okay, so so there's this guy, Renz, who's a lawyer for Make Americans Free Again, and I'm trying to get in touch with the legal team there because they're completely mishandling the statistics on this stuff. But there's a woman who claims to be a whistleblower who hasn't released the raw data, but you can find the PDF of their legal briefing where Exhibit D explains what she's claiming. And she's claiming that as a government employee, she had access to medical records that showed that there were 45,000 deaths that occurred 3 days after the vaccination. And so the people who have mishandled these statistics in the legal briefing say that we now know that the vaccine has caused 45,000 deaths. That is wrong and so utterly irrefutable that their case will go nowhere if they don't get the help of a biostatistician or a public health epidemiologist, or at least someone who's taken a statistics class or something to help them revise their conclusions. But here's the thing. So I looked up the CDC data. The CDC has how many people die per day on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, each day of the week, and on average to all combined. And on any 3 given days in the year, you combined, you would expect there to be 15,000 deaths. And so that doesn't tell you anything about what the vaccine caused, but it also doesn't tell you that there was 45,000 extra deaths. It tells you if her data is correct, and I have no idea because I haven't seen it, I've only seen the claim. If her data is correct, what it says is that there's an excess of 30,000 people ish who died 3 days after vaccine, because you would expect 15,000, there were instead 45,000. Now, that the last complete CDC data is probably not taking into account pandemic and lockdown related increased death from other means. And so the vaccine contribution excess death might be a little bit lower when you chip away around the edges from that. But it's 30,000 ish extra deaths. And that doesn't mean that the vaccine caused them, but that whistleblower needs a statistician so that they can make a rational and not easily refutable claim about that evidence, so that it actually reaches the courtroom floor. And so that if it reaches the courtroom floor, it doesn't get shot down by the defense's expert witness in a quarter of a second. But if that's true, then the deaths registered in VAERS are dramatically underestimating the excess deaths associated with it. But Snopes and all these other fact checkers, they're not fact checkers. Like, there's only one way to fact check that claim, and that is to find someone who has the and that is to find someone who either has access to the medical records or to subpoena the medical records that were used and extract the raw data from those medical records and show that she's wrong. And there weren't 45,000 excess deaths. 45,000 total deaths. And so she might be wrong about that, but that's not what Snopes did. And that's not what any other thing that comes up that is fact checking that did. And so I question the intelligence or the motives of the people fact checking that claim. I question the competence of the people making the claim, and I question everyone involved's motives and competence are in question right now, because the claim is ridiculous on the way that it's made in the legal brief, but the fact checking of the claim is equally ridiculous on Snopes and everything else. And that data needs to be transparently shown in public. And people that understand statistics need to argue about it. And I make no claims about it because I'm not a disinformationist. Okay. Oh, but I mean, after I tackle the transmission issue, I'm going to do an article on the underreporting or overreporting of VAERS and other safety data, because I looked at the CDC risk reward analysis for the children, and I followed the references in it for reporting bias, and the references in that, and the references in that. And so CDC says that VAERS data are known to be underreported or subject to biased reporting. And I'm like, over-reporting is a form of bias. Is my YouTube frozen? Let me go down to... Okay, I'm looking for YouTube comments on whether it froze, because it looks like it froze on my screen. Oh, wait a second. No, I just don't have it playing. Oh, okay. I'm not frozen. Okay. Sorry, I only have the screen open for the chat, but it also had a paused version of the live video, and I was like, "Oh no, I froze." Okay, so CDC says that VAERS is known to be subject to underreporting or biased reporting. So I'm like, overreporting is a form of bias. So why didn't they say underreporting or overreporting? So I go and I look through the references and the references to the references, and even in a paper where I found it was one of the very high level flus, and I think it was swine flu. It might have been bird flu. I don't remember. Um, but they were talking about side effects there in that year, and they had a whole paragraph on stimulated reporting, which is there's such a media sensation about this that more people are going to report to VAERS. And so after dealing with stimulated reporting evidence, they go on to their data and they say, this is the data, but since we know theirs is underreported, blank. Okay. Point being that even when they were talking about stimulated reporting, their view was just that it's known that theirs is so underreported that if you have media stimulated hype, you get stimulated reporting that reduces the degree of underreportedness. Okay, so nowhere in the peer-reviewed literature or CDC site have I found a claim that the VAERS data is overreported. The only place I can find this claim is from grad students and doctors on Twitter. So only place I can find this claim. I can't find it on CDC site or in the peer-reviewed literature. And so, we know VAERS is not necessarily causal. We know VAERS is underreported, and we know VAERS reporting increases in response to media hype. So we can expect that there is stimulated reporting now that is reducing the underreportedness compared to what it would have been for the flu vaccine, but is not leading to overreporting, most likely. But if you want to claim that it's overreporting, you need the actual data to show it. And if all the side effect data is in VAERS or otherwise, or in whatever VSafe or whatever, like if these things are underreported or overreported, the only way to show that is if you know the actual number. And so the appropriate thing. Okay, someone's saying I'm frozen, but people in the text are saying, okay, YouTube, am I frozen? Everyone in YouTube says not frozen. Anyway, so so the appropriate way to have a final answer on vaccine safety is to say, look, we know that we have various ways of looking at side effects. We have various ways of looking at causally, signals for causation. We have various ways of doing all these fancy statistics. But at the end of the day, what is the all-cause mortality 3 days after a vaccine? What is the all-cause mortality 2 weeks after a vaccine? What is the all-cause mortality 2 weeks after second shot? What is the all-cause mortality 6 months after you were vaccinated? How does that differ by demographic? Because there's no reason that lawsuits and FOIA requests, I'm not a lawyer, but as far as I know, there's no reason why that data cannot be legally forced to have absolute numbers, comprehensive data sets on all-cause mortality extracted from medical records that are precisely tied to vaccination dates. I don't see why we can't produce that, and that should be the ultimate arbiter of what might be underreported or overreported, rather than very granular, specific hypothesis-driven papers on the exact rate of vaccine-driven this or that. Because at the end of the day, all-cause mortality is, if someone died, they died. You can dispute whether they died of COVID. You can dispute whether they died of the vaccine, but you can't dispute whether they died. In most cases, certain Jim Morrison notwithstanding, or whatever. Um, and so that should be the ultimate arbiter of risk benefit ratio for seriousness. And that data should be demanded by legal requests. Um, to have something that just settles all of this, because you don't even have to do a calculation with all-cause mortality, right? If 6 months after the vaccine, X number of people who were 20 died, X number of people didn't. 6 months after the vaccine, X number of people who were 75 died, X number of people didn't. Then that's very objective, totally indisputable, raw all-cause mortality data that gives you a very simple number that doesn't require any kind of fancy statistics that are subject to, to a lot more bias than just the total number of people that died. All right. Okay, back to the live chat. Jan 2852 says many lab techs are saying that people who caught COVID PCR positive are negative for IgG antibodies. That's not surprising because if you're currently PCR positive, not only is there a chance that you might not have serum IgG antibodies develop significantly at all in a small percentage, but it takes some time for them to become positive. So that's good. That's par for the course and expected. Anthony Bell says, thank you for understanding and input. Keep holding the line. I will. Jan 2852 says there's no distinction for COVID deaths. Many die with COVID, not from COVID. That's true. And there's various ways that they standardize for that in trials, apparently. But in the non-standardized public health data, it's an issue. But all-cause mortality post-vaccination is not subject to those problems, and then therefore we should know that number. The God unvaxxed. I don't know. I haven't looked at anything on the vaccine's efficacy against Lambda variants. I'm currently focusing very strictly on transmission. What I know about efficacy is by means of having researched transmission right now. Gabriel says, I just moved to NYC. And it's a shame how we can't go to the gym. Right next to me, I have a squat rack. And on Pro Freedom Eats, they not only have restaurants, but they have gyms that are not enforcing the mandates organized by their highlights. So on their Instagram highlights, click on gyms, and then it'll show you screenshots of each gym, possibly with links, depending on whether they're on Instagram to the gym. Tupperware, I've been to several protests. Cool. If I don't know if you're in New York, but if you are, say hi next time. Jan 2852, animal reservoirs alone will crush the narrative to jab everyone. It has to be endemic, protect the elderly and compromised and go on with our lives. I mean, they might crush it logically, but they're not using logic in the mandate. So I don't think it's going to crush that. Mockingbird Wilderness Mirrors, to vaccinate someone, they die immediately after, and then say they were that they weren't vaxxed is set only to hide vaccine deaths. No way around the sad truth. Well, I mean, even if it wasn't immediate, they're also, quite frequently saying, well, it wasn't related to the vaccine. And so that's why there should be a legal effort to subpoena the information of what's the all-cause mortality the day of the vax, what's the all-cause mortality 3 days after the vax, what's the all-cause mortality 2 weeks after the second dose, what's the all-cause mortality 6 months after the vax. And then that should just be openly available to get a final answer that is not subject to any kind of manipulation. You can manipulate what what the death was attributable to, but you can't manipulate the death in most cases. Gen 2852 points out there's a bias. Death with COVID is automatically caused by COVID, but death with shot is not. That's generally true. I mean, it's not as if no agencies anywhere are trying to sort out death with COVID from death from COVID, but there are obviously famous cases where death with COVID was the metric, and there's a clear double standard for assuming anything that goes along with COVID is caused by the virus, and assuming that anything that goes along with the shot is not caused by the shot, unless you can irrefutably prove it otherwise. They should be treated the same. All-cause mortality treats them the same. By making both of them irrelevant. The God Unvaxxed says, Dr. Chris Masterdon, tell us your thoughts about the CDC trying to hide the efficacy of the jab. I don't know that they're trying to hide anything on the efficacy. Well, I mean, I guess they're hiding breakthrough cases. So they are, I would say they're hiding the efficacy against caseload. And in doing so, they're hiding the denominator for hospitalization and death. So I disagree with that. Robert Brumbelow says, so what to do for someone who's IgG deficient, massive autoimmune conditions? We are just screwed, LOL. Not really. I mean, stimulating mucosal IgG, I would think, would be the right way. And so there are going to be intranasal vaccinations coming online at some point. And you can't really control your degree of infection. But if we had a way to like controlled low dose nasal dead fragments of SARS-CoV-2, then that would probably be what you'd want to do for IgD deficient massive autoimmune condition. Gen 2852. So for natural immunity, we should test for IgA and not IgG. No, you need to test the nose for IgA, and it's got to be multimeric IgA, which is IgA bound two antibodies or four antibodies. I don't have four fists. I'm telling you, the correlates available are worthless for natural immunity, and natural immunity is grossly underestimated by the available tests. Jan 2052 is going to join the marches in Los Angeles. Thank you. If anyone else should join their local marches. I mean, the way that you check for natural immunity is if you had COVID, you have natural immunity. I don't think there's any test online for the best stuff. You can get T-cell immunity and you can get antibody tests, but they're grossly underestimating natural immunity. Gary Britting, that being said, what are your thoughts on this future surveillance system? It needs to be, it is bad. And the way to escape from it is to build alternative technological infrastructure that does not depend on any central servers and does not depend on big tech. And surveillance, I don't know. I mean, the surveillance is, I don't think we're going to escape surveillance. But I think we can escape control over our basic money and our speech with decentralized technology. I mean, obviously cash is also has utility there. But staying plugged into the benefits of technology while escaping total control. I think the solution to that is decentralized blockchain peer-to-peer based technology and building decentralized platforms on top of those that allow usability like what we have from big tech, but underlying infrastructure that escapes central control. ACM says England and Israel offer 6-month passports for the previously infected. It's a conversation occurring here in the US anywhere. Not anywhere that I know. New York has no natural immunity. I don't believe California mandates have any natural immunity. The federal government has no natural immunity. I don't think it's happening anywhere. Gary Britting says, "Let me ask this: how would we know the outcome of an individual letting their own immunity fight the virus versus the vaccine?" I'm not sure what you mean, but the difference is that the vaccine is designed to produce a systemic IgG response, which has inflammation associated with it, whereas natural immunity is overwhelmingly biased towards a mucosal IgA response, which is not inflammatory and mops things up in your nose, your eyes, your mouth, and your throat, and is not correlated with antibodies in your blood. Edward Dench says, "I'd rather see a pithy assertion like vax status does not reduce your asymptomatic infectability on a shirt." Um, well, when I'm done with my article, I'll find a scientifically accurate, pithy way to make a T-shirt out of it. I'll make a T-shirt out of it. I guess I could, if there's demand for it, maybe I could, charge above cost, drop ship it, and use the proceeds to donate to legal, a pool for legal support for people fired or something. Gary Britting says, "Which scenario do you believe creates a better survival outcome? Fighting the virus with your own immunity or having the vaccine plus your own immunity? Person is metabolically healthy and between 30 and 50 years old." I am not on safety and efficacy yet, and this is not medical advice. I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm not liable for anything you do with this information. And this information is my current thoughts based on not having done due diligence as much as I will when I write an article about this. But I would say that no risk factors for severe disease, um, and age 30 to 50 is probably better off doing natural things known to be protective than having the vaccine. But I'm not stating that as a fact. I'm stating that as a partially educated guess, and I could revise that when I do more research. Jerry Levin, the Delta variant came from India. Why is no one talking about that? All I hear is the unvaccinated in America are responsible for creating new variants. These propaganda terms are not subject to logic or evidence. They are going to say these pithy, misleading statements and just repeat them over and over again. But their actual, I believe what they're trying to allude to is with unvaccinated people in America isn't creating the variants. It's spread, which is refuted by the data I went over at the beginning of this video. But they are on the variants. They are saying unvaccinated people in general are responsible. The science has to largely let go of where the mutations came from and look at why they're spreading. And I think you can make a much stronger case that the vaccines are causing the spread. And whereas I think it would be subject to much more controversy whether they're influencing in one direction or another the actual rate of mutation. Matt Blackman, I haven't looked completely at all the aspects of immunity affected by the mRNA vaccine, so I can't comment on that yet. Solemn sugary soy sludge sobriety. Yes, lysine has antiviral properties in general, but there's no good evidence showing that it reduces COVID risk, and there's very good evidence that arginine does. Matt Blackman says if the vax disables the innate immune system, it explains why infection rates in the vax are as high or higher than unvaxxed and short of duration of protection. I'm going to look into mechanisms explaining that. Before I write my article, I just did this video because it'll probably take me a couple more days to write the article, and I thought the information on the real central study had to get out there. Matt Blackman says, I rely on a microbiome rich diet and Nerf 2 for years now. Never got sick. That's great. Gen 2852 says, my cyst got disabled with neurological disorder 3 months after the shots. Doctors found nothing, but never reported the VAERS. Well, the trials found that the mRNA vaccines triple the result of Bell's palsy. So that's why I said, it's complicated because COVID seems to cause Bell's palsy and stress might too. But, there's placebo controlled evidence suggesting that the mRNA vaccines are worse for neurological problems, because also in the UK post-marketing data, the non-mRNA vaccines are not associated with Bell's palsy, and the mRNA vaccines are. So there's multiple lines of evidence that seem to suggest the mRNA vaccines are worse for neurological problems than the others. Matt Blackman says, as I understand it, Nerf 2 potency relies on synergy between Nerf 2 such as sulforaphane, quercetin, microrhizacials, curcuminoids taken together. I disagree. Nerf 2 is an umbrella gene regulator that responds to stressors to increase antioxidant defense and xenobiotic defense, defense against oxidative stress and foreign chemicals and detox and stuff like that. And the synergy really is with these things that stimulate Nerf2 and the raw materials to make the enzymes, the glutathione and the minerals that are cofactors for the enzymes. So Nerf2 stimulation with polyphenol compounds and herbs should be seen as synergistic with protein, especially glycine and cysteine, selenium, vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc, copper, manganese, iron, and all the other riboflavin, niacin, real broad spectrum of raw materials that you need to make detox and antioxidant protection happen. When you're taking these herbal compounds that they don't provide raw materials, they just provide the signal to make things that use those raw materials to protect you. All right, I'm looking through the live chat. A lot of discussion, less than questions. I'm going to look for specific questions on the stuff we're talking about. Due to the number of questions and comments, I'm going to look specifically for stuff about COVID vaccines and transmission. Brianne says, may have answered this, but do you know roughly what the breakthrough infection rate is amongst vaccinated? Well, CDC is not reporting that data, and so no. But I think it's much more interesting from a public health perspective to look at the infectious virus shedding of vaccinated people, which is the same as it is for unvaccinated people. You can go look at that paper for the exact rates. Kristen McCullough says, I have severe allergies. My allergy doctor does not test for the COVID vaccine. What are your thoughts on testing for allergy to the COVID vaccines? I don't know how you would test for an allergy to that. Hope Freesey says, Chris, do they use aborted fetal cell lines in the production of the vaccines? So what that Project Veritas video was saying was that they use HEC 293 cells, and those, you know, I think it should be known, and I think Pfizer is wrong for deliberately hiding this information from people because they thought that it would increase vaccine hesitancy if people had religious objections to it. But what they're saying is, you know, you can, so it depends on what your religious objection is, right? So these are cell lines that were taken from an aborted fetus in the 1970s. And then they took cells and they grew cells from those cells and grew cells from those cells and grew cells from those cells for 50 years. So there were no additional fetuses aborted because they did that, because they used those cells, right? So if your ethical issue is, did I cause by taking this, did I contribute to a new fetus being aborted? Or did I take an advantage of a new fetus that was aborted, that if that fetus wasn't aborted, these things couldn't have been made? Then the answer is no. But if your objection is, I refuse to participate in any way in anything that has any relation to aborted fetuses, then yes, the Pfizer vaccine, we know from the whistleblower, and maybe we knew that before. I don't know what was known about this or not from the R&D before. But what the whistleblower on Project Veritas was saying was they are using these cell lines taken from this aborted fetus from 50 years ago. You know, so if your ethical objection includes that there was one aborted fetus 50 years ago that you are participating in, even though your participation does nothing to make more aborted fetuses or to take advantage of any newly aborted fetuses, then your objection is relevant. But you should know, if you're going to engage with that, you should know that that is a cell line from an aborted fetus 50 years ago and not a cell that was taken directly from a newly aborted fetus. I'm more curious what she said about how when the FDA visited, they had to black out all the windows of the room that they were running tests in. I find that creepy, but I have no idea what it means. Okay, I'm gonna go to Instagram questions now. Just so you know, if you were on Instagram, like when we started way back at the beginning, then I lost your chat, and if you ask the question, you got to re-ask it here. Making McKenna walks, you should be outraged by these rules for the military. I agree. Cordal X is the most reliable, unbiased, and trustworthy info. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for your kind words. McKenna walks. My friend's dad just died just days after getting the shot. The doctor tried for 30 minutes to report, and the system wouldn't let him report. Well, I hope he tries again, because we should have as accurate a tally as we can. Creatures Aspects 99. I don't know anything right now about virus deletions. I haven't been looking into that. I'm focused very much on transmission right now. And you're right that they would have in the medical records that they died and that they were vaccinated at a certain time point. That's why I'm saying the all-cause mortality data should be subpoenaed. Denny Cook says, Mom just got diagnosed with essential thrombocytosis, emerged post-vaccine. Anyone looking into this that you know of? I will, but I haven't yet because I'm working on transmission. But until I do my due diligence, and this is not medical advice, I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm not liable for anything you do with this information, but I would be assuming as a working paradigm that any clotting due to the vaccine has the same mechanism of action as clotting due to COVID. And so I would treat it, I would try to relieve it in the same way. Creatures Aspects 99. Thrombocytosis is it's basically a clotting issue. Denny Cook says basically blood cancer, too many white blood cells. Maybe I had that wrong. Is that not causing thrombosis if you have thrombocytosis? Looking through the Instagram chat. Reframe Wellness. I don't have an ETA on the book right now. It's what I'm working on full time, with the exception of a couple of weeks now where I am doing some emergency research on vaccine stuff due to extremely imminent legal implications and decisions that many people need to make. Thanks, Daniel. Hi from Switzerland. Thank you for saying you love my work. Creatures Aspect 99. My mother-in-law has raging rheumatoid arthritis after her jabs when she didn't have it before. Her doctor told her that she's seeing a lot of cases caused by the jabs. I'm gonna assume that autoimmunity from the vaccine and from COVID have similar mechanisms, and that they should be, treated in very much the same way. Susan Marie Leona says, sorry, unclear. I tested positive for IgG and IgM antibodies way back in December 2020. What does that mean for me regarding immunity? Nothing. Antibody test or not test of immunity. Susan Marie Leona, I should note that I never had COVID symptoms, or at least I don't recall. Well, it means you probably had a natural infection. You have some level of immunity, but what it does to your infection risk, we don't know. We can't quantify that. Grace Carrick, could you please summarize since just joining? You should go back to the YouTube video, which never got interrupted, and watch it from the beginning. But the gist of this is I went over results that show that there's zero difference in culturable infectious virus from the nose of vaccinated and unvaccinated people. And so vaccine mandates are likely to increase transmission because they don't decrease transmission, but they do eliminate symptoms for many vaccinated people who have infectious virus in their nose. And they create a cultural message that vaccinated people don't need to be cautious anymore. And vaccination rates correlate positively, but not statistically significantly, with caseloads across countries. Creatures Aspects 99 says they kill hundreds of fetuses depending on the cell line. They don't have to kill new fetuses for a cell line that is descended from a 1970s fetus. They just have to culture the cells from each other. Coach Palazzolo says Moderna follows the same concept as Pfizer regarding aborted fetus. I don't know. I'm sure there are other people that know this, and I don't. Sarah Haley, what are your thoughts on addressing breakthrough illness following third Pfizer poke? Exactly the same as you would deal with any other illness, COVID illness. Reframe Wellness says, what do you think happens to immunity if a vaxxed individual gets COVID? Do they get the same protection as someone with natural immunity only? Can they get COVID again? I think the natural immunity is better than the vaccination. And so I'm assuming that getting natural immunity after the COVID shot is going to improve your immunity uh, and broaden it in a positive way that deals with variants better. All right, that's the Instagram questions. I saw some more coming on YouTube, and then I'm going to get going soon. All right, just looking to see if there's any highly specific questions to this content. Jan 2852, Chris, what are your thoughts on Pfizer being EUA approved for kids 6 to 11 trial, just 4,000 total kids in 2 months data, small trial? I didn't, so I didn't, I didn't look at the childhood trial yet. So I'm going to decline that question until I get to read that trial. Because I've read the main Pfizer trials, but I'm reading the trials by way of looking for evidence that they reduce asymptomatic infection. And so I am taking copious notes on all aspects of the trials I'm reading, but I haven't read some of the Pfizer, the non big trial Pfizer data yet, because it didn't seem to have that information. All right, folks. I'm all done. So if you're on YouTube and you've been here the whole time, you can you've seen the whole thing. If you got here late, you can go back and watch the recording. If you're on Instagram, I'm not sure if I lost the first hour when this basically went down on me. So you might want to go to YouTube and watch the full YouTube video. And then, if you found this valuable, please try to support my work in some way. And so, at chrismasterjohnphd.com/donate, you can donate. At chrismasterjohnphd.com/COVID guide, you can buy my COVID guide. At chrismasterjohnphd.com/book, you can pre-order my book. At chrismasterjohnphd.com/cheat sheet, you can get my 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 comprehensive system for managing nutritional status. And at chrismasterjohnphd.com/support, you can find like a zillion different ways to support my work, some of which are at no extra cost to you if you're using some of my affiliate links and stuff like that. So if you find